This episode goes out to Ryan in Anaheim, California.
Hi there, Megan Robinson here. Welcome to the 22nd episode of the Nightblade Epic Podcast. It's another very exciting Monday. The Alchemist's Touch is finally available on Audible. It's the first book in the Academy Journals, and it tells the story of a boy named Eben who finally gets to learn to use his magic. The Academy Journals is such an important series to us, and it's where so many of our readers come from. It's got a wizard school, crime families, mystery, and adventure. It's Harry Potter meets The Godfather. What more could you want? Well, you could want it to be on Audible, and now it is. The audiobook, just like this podcast, is narrated by Garrett Robinson, and it's a perfect companion piece to the series. The Academy Journals is going to teach you more about Underrealm than you ever thought possible. So go to Audible today and pick up your copy. Hey, guess what? There's only 5 more episodes left in this season of the Nightblade Epic Podcast. After we reach the end of Nightblade, we're taking a short break. But after that, we'll be back on our weekly schedule, releasing episodes of the next book in the series, Mystic. And during our short break, we've got a very, very special surprise for you. We know you're going to love it. And honestly, we've been putting it together since the very first episode, so we're super excited to share it. We just want to tell you from the bottom of our hearts how much we appreciate you. We launched this podcast over 5 months ago, and we didn't know if anyone was even going to notice. But as of this episode, more than 10,000 of you have. That's incredible. We're so happy to bring the show to you each week, and we hope it's something you can share with your friends for a long time to come. Okay, enough with the sappy stuff. Now it's time for today's episode. Today you're getting chapters 34 and 35 of Nightblade. When we left off, Gregor had just fallen victim to a trap, and Lauren was trying desperately to save him from death. Enjoy!
Nightblade, Chapter 34. No, whispered Lauren. She pushed and squirmed, slithering out from beneath Gregor's heavy legs before fighting free and rising to her feet. He lived. Spikes had punctured his shoulder in 2 places, but his head hung free from the grate, facing the hallway's mouth. His eyes twitched in pain, gritted teeth visible as his lips split in a grimace. All along his face, muscles spasmed in agony as he fought to contain a scream. "Gregor!" Damaris fell to her knees before him, holding his head in support. Her hands hovered over the spikes in his shoulder, at once seeking to hold him in comfort and afraid to touch the terrible wounds. Lauren seized the bottom of the grate and heaved as hard as she could. It remained as heavy as it had been before, and now Gregor's weight only added to it. Lauren fought and struggled, gritting her teeth until she feared her arms might tear from their sockets. A low, strangled groan escaped her. "Stop!" Strong arms wrapped around her shoulders and dragged her back from the grate. 2 guards pulled her back and away, one twisting her hand up behind her shoulder blades until she cried out. "Release her, fools!" cried Damaris. Both guards froze. "She tries to save your captain while you do nothing. Help her!" Their hands left Lauren like she had grown fire-hot. Then, together, the 3 of them seized the iron grate and heaved. Gregor's resolve finally buckled as the spikes slid free, and a blasting roar of pain echoed through the sewer. From outside the hallway and out of sight, Lauren heard Auntie's mad, cackling laughter. As the guards held the grate aloft, Lauren released it and helped Damaris drag Gregor clear. They pulled the captain up against the sewer wall, leaning him against it where he panted in pain. "Gregor," said Damaris, her voice verging on panic, "are you all right?" "I will survive, my lady," said Gregor. "I have suffered worse, though mayhap we will not go riding for a week or 2. It was a weak jest, and Damaris gave it a weak laugh. Then she placed a hand on Lauren's arm and met her eyes with gratitude. He would have died without you." Lauren ducked her head, uncomfortable. "I wished for no one to be killed." Damaris squeezed her arm, but Lauren saw Gregor's eyes, and there was no trace of gratitude within them. She dropped her gaze. "The key," said Lauren. "Give it to me. I will open the lock." "It waits in the lock," said Gregor. "One of my men will open it." "No, Gregor, let her," said Damaris. "She knew of this trap and tried to save you. Let us not risk another of our own when one is here who knows this place." Lauren felt a flush creep up her neck and into her cheeks. Damaris spoke as if she were some authority on traps. Like a master thief, she thought. Gregor's look only darkened. She stood and went to the 2 guards who still held the grate. A third had joined them, and she had to squeeze beneath them to bend under it. She glanced back over her shoulder at the guards. "Hold it until I have opened the door. Then try pushing it back into the ceiling. It may lock in place." One of the men nodded, and Lauren edged forwards until she stood before the lock. The key waited for her there, so she tried turning it. It twisted easily, but the door did not open, and when Lauren tried to bring the key back to rest, she heard a snick within. That, then, was the trap's trigger. But how to open the door? "Jim?" In a few moments, Lauren heard the pad of bare feet behind her. She glanced back to see him on the other side of the grate. "What do you want?" said Jem, looking nervously up at the guards. "This key will not open the door. I hoped the greatest pickpocket in Cabras, a scholar and sometime medica, might have a notion. I have heard of locks that have more than one layer. Try pushing it in farther." Lauren frowned, but she turned back to the lock and pushed on the key. To her surprise, it slid another finger breadth into the lock. She twisted, and it turned back in the other direction. But still, the door did not open. Lauren almost withdrew the key again, but then she froze. Very, very carefully, she took her hand from the key and slowly backed away, sliding out from under the grate. "What is wrong?" said Damaris. "Why did it not open?" "I am not sure, but I think there may be another trap in place. Have your men lower the grate." The guards looked at Damaris. She gave them a sharp nod. Slowly they lowered the grate until it rested on the door again. "Everyone out of the hallway," said Lauren. "Help him." The men moved to lift Gregor, but he waved them off. Slowly he rose to his feet, though Lauren saw a fresh trickle of blood stream from the gash in his shoulder beneath the chainmail. A red streak marked the stone wall where he had rested. Everyone backed out of the hallway and around the corner, where Gregor sank back to the ground. Auntie waited there for them, a vicious grin plastered across her face. It widened when she saw Gregor. "Found my door sharper than you thought, eh? It serves you right for snooping where you were not wanted." "Silence her," said Damaris. One of the guards struck Auntie again, and Damaris sighed. "Not like that. Gag her." Someone produced a strip of cloth, and they tied it tight around her mouth. Lauren took a step back into the hallway, but Jem put his hand on her arm. "What do you think you are doing?" he said, voice small and scared. "You cannot go in there alone." Lauren removed his hand. "If a trap awaits, the fewer people in danger, the better." "But not you. Let one of these men do it." Lauren glanced at them. "I am smaller and nimbler. If anyone can avoid another surprise, it will be me. I dodged the first one already." "Let me do it," said Jem. "I am smaller still." Lauren gave him a little smile. "Not only a great pickpocket, but brave into the bargain. Thank you for your offer, but no. I could not bear it if anything happened to you." That held truth, but Lauren dared not tell him the rest, that she wanted to be first in the room, to seize her dagger and escape before Damaris realized that Annis did not wait behind the door. Jem let her go at last with a final doubtful look. Lauren approached the door slowly, each step harder than the last. Fear gripped her tight enough to weaken her limbs. If she guessed right, that another trap waited the withdrawal of this key, she had no way of knowing its nature. The key poked out, tarnished and dirty. She placed her fingers upon it with effort. First she tried pushing. The key did not move. She tried returning it to the center, but it would not do that either. With a slow, measured breath, She tried withdrawing the key. It gave, and she heard a snick. Lauren danced away on the balls of her feet, turning and running low for the mouth of the hallway. She hit the stones at the end of the passage, sliding and nearly falling into the watery channel. But she came to a stop just in time, and, after neither sound nor attack followed, turned to look down the hallway again. Nothing. Nothing had happened to the door. Auntie's wild, muffled laughter brayed around the gag in her mouth. "What? What is it?" said Damaris. Lauren felt her cheeks burn. Something to distract and delay a would-be thief, but not another trap. Auntie had only led Lauren to make a fool of herself. She could withstand embarrassment easier than a spike through her body, but she did not have to like it. She rose quickly to her feet and dusted herself off. "Nothing. I thought I heard something, that is all. I do not desire to find another iron grate falling upon my head." "Well, if it is nothing, then open the door," said Damaris, irritation sounding in her voice. "Of course." She returned to the door. The key still protruded, mocking her. Its rusty surface reminded her of the rot from a dying tree. Clearly it had not been cleaned in some time. She sighed and tried turning the key again. It did not move. She returned it to the first position and turned it the other way. Nothing happened, except that she heard the snick that would have released the iron grate had it not already been hanging down from the ceiling. Lauren removed the key and tried the handle. Nothing. She tried everything she could think of, pushing the key to the second position before turning it the other way, trying both directions from the first position, inserting the key upside down, trying to find a third position. Each attempt seemed more hopeless than the last. Lauren cursed and nearly flung the key at the floor. She had missed some trick, and from what she had seen of Auntie's madness, the weremage would not tell them, no matter how stringently Gregor's men put her to the question. Then a thought struck her. She looked again at the key in her hand. She saw the rust, so thick it pitted and bubbled the metal. Some of the rust had rubbed off on her thumb. A smile spread across her face. She stalked to the sewer passage and went to Auntie. The weremage grinned through her gag, hazel eyes cruel beneath a shock of white hair. "The key is like you," said Lauren. "A false face. The mask that hides the truth, too eye-catching and obvious to be ignored." Auntie's smile faltered. "Hold her," said Lauren. Then she knelt and reached for Auntie's boot. Auntie screamed and kicked out, narrowly missing Lauren's ear. Another guard stepped in and seized her legs, holding her powerless and almost suspended in midair. Auntie thrashed and screamed, but they were too many and too strong. Lauren seized the right boot and pulled it off. "It is the way you hold yourself," she said. "One foot out and pointed. That might mark you as a dancer in a troupe, but when you speak, you always keep your right foot hidden behind the other, so that the person before you cannot see." She reached into the boot and withdrew a silver key. It gleamed bright in the torchlight, every surface sparkling clean, its edges worn from constant use. Damaris smiled. "A clever girl you continue to prove yourself, Lauren of the family Nelda." "Stay back a moment more," said Lauren. "More dangers may await." "As you say," said Damaris. Her eyes roved Auntie, who nearly frothed at the mouth with the madness of her struggle. "But I think we have discovered the witch's last trick." Lauren nodded. Damaris could believe that, so long as she did not follow Lauren to the door or see what lay beyond it. Lauren went back and inserted the key. It turned easily, once, and in the right direction, and the door swung open under her touch. "Did it work?" called Damaris. "Indeed," said Lauren. "A moment more. I will inspect the room beyond and ensure it is safe. Jem, your hand, please." The boy came scampering down the hallway. Lauren seized the bottom of the grate and hoisted it a pace above the floor. Iron screamed on rock. Once she had it up, she tossed her head at it. "Take this. It is heavy, but you can hold it just long enough for me to get under." She leaned in a bit closer. "And back out." His eyes widened, and he nodded silently. His thin hands wrapped around the iron, and she saw his wiry muscles springing to life beneath his hands. Lauren dropped to the ground and slithered forwards. She must be quick. Jem could not hold the thing forever, and Damaris would soon grow suspicious. Once past the doorframe, Lauren rose to her feet again. Only the faintest torchlight penetrated the gloom of the hidey hole, and Lauren's eyes took a moment to adjust. When they did, they took in rows of shelves that stretched from floor to ceiling. They ran the rim of a room that stretched more than 8 paces wide in all directions, a perfect circle. In the center, a round table lay piled high with gold of all types, coins, goblets, platters, and other finery, as well as many, many purses that sat fat and bulging. Conquests of Auntie's children, Lauren presumed, for all their strings were cut and frayed. She whines endlessly about feeding her children, and yet here she has enough to feed an army, thought Lauren. On the shelves lay 1,000 and more treasures Lauren could not comprehend. She saw weapons, helmets, haphazard pieces of armor and shields, glass vials stopped with cork, and many other things she did not recognize. Dust caked many of them, but others gleamed fresh and clean. But the shelves faded from her mind as she saw her dagger resting upon the center table. All her mind focused upon it, and at the same time she remembered Jem behind her. Lauren ran for the table and scooped it up, sliding it back into its sheath, which still waited upon her belt. For good measure, she took the biggest purse of coins she could find, with strings long enough to tie at her waist. Then she ran for the entrance and dove to the ground, sliding out and onto the floor of the hallway past a struggling, red-faced Jem. The boy let go once Lauren was clear, and the grate went crashing down. "What was that?" said Damaris. "Nothing," said Lauren. "The place is safe." Guards filed in immediately, seizing the grate and swinging it up. They stretched towards the ceiling and pushed the grate into place, where Lauren heard a deep click. The men removed their hands, and the gate remained, held firm by the trap's mechanism. Lauren reached the hallway's end. She wanted to run before anyone could react, but Damaris stood close by, and Auntie behind her. "Is she there?" said Damaris, eyes wide and hopeful. Even as Lauren grasped for the right thing to say, the voice of a guard came from the hallway. "There is no sign of Annis, my lady." Suddenly Lauren's throat was bone dry, but Damaris only turned back to Auntie. She reached up and yanked the gag down so that it hung around Auntie's neck. "Where is she? Where is my daughter?" Lauren reached out and took Jem's arm, gently and without a sound. She took one step back. After a moment's confusion, he nodded and followed suit. "Who cares?" said Auntie. "Probably dead in some alley somewhere, and a blessing to the 9 lands." Damaris did not scream at her, did not cry out. Instead, she reached into the sleeve of her dress, and when her hand came out, it held a dagger. The blade sank into Auntie's side, between the ribs and under the arm. Auntie gasped and tried to scream, but it came out as a thin wheeze. "You can use your magic to heal yourself," said Damaris, withdrawing the dagger. Her words held truth, for Lauren saw the wound sealing itself already as Auntie's eyes glowed. "I will test the limits of that magic, weremage. Tell me where my daughter is." Lauren took another step back, this one quicker. Too quick, for it caught Gregor's eye. He stared at her. She saw realization begin to dawn in his eyes. Auntie gasped again, and her voice returned. "I have not seen your daughter in days, and the last I did, she was running about with that one." She tossed her head over Damaris's shoulder. The merchant turned slowly, eyes fixing on Lauren's. Her mask of cool, icy calm melted slowly away, and in its place, Lauren saw a fury and a fire more terrible than she had ever seen in the face of her father. Lauren seized Jem's arm and spun him around. One of Damaris's guards blinked in confusion as they dodged around him, and together they fled into blackness. Nightblade, Chapter 35. Jem led her to the first drainage hole they found. "It looks tall," he said, breathless. Lauren ignored him, seized him under the arms, and flung him to the edge of the drainage hole. Once he crawled out, she leaped to seize it herself. But he had been right, and Lauren had misjudged the distance. Her fingers could find no purchase on the stone. "Come on!" cried Jem, reaching down for her. Lauren heard shouts down the sewer behind her. She turned back for a moment to see a cluster of torchlights dancing down the passageway towards her. "No time! Run! Vanish! I will not let them catch me!" Without waiting for his reply, she dashed off down the passageway. Drainage holes lined the ceiling here, lighting her way, but they also let the guards see her easily, and the passage did not split in many directions, so she had no chance to lose them in a maze. Still, Lauren had grown up running, and the guards wore heavy armor. Soon she had gained enough of a lead that she thought she might risk climbing out, and tried it at the next hole that looked low enough. This time she judged the height correctly, and her fingers clutched easily at the stone. She hauled up and slid out, emerging into the bright daylight. Below her she heard the furious shouts of her pursuers. Even as she watched, a mail-gloved hand seized the drainage hole's edge. She fled blindly down the street as the guard emerged behind her, giving chase with a shout. Soon Lauren heard more voices join him. As she rounded the next corner, she looked about desperately to determine her whereabouts. They were in the wealthier district for certain, but beyond that she did not know. More heavy boots tramped the street behind her. Trying to get her bearings slowed her down. She needed time to form a plan, but would not get it so long as they followed. 2 constables froze and stared at Lauren in shock as she rounded another corner. She darted down an alley away from them, but the guardsmen behind her did not lose the trail. "The roofs," she thought. "I need the roofs." Finally, she saw one, its edge hanging low with 2 crates against the wall beneath it. She vaulted up the crates and seized the shingles, pulling herself up. Finding her feet again, she ran along the slope to the next roof, leaping the gap to reach it. In the open air, she felt her head clear. Not far off, she spotted the familiar sight of the constable's jail towering over the other buildings. That, at least, told Lauren where she was. And just like that, a plan appeared. It was mad, but madness would have to serve when reason could not. She found a path that cut left and led her towards the jail. On the streets below, Lauren saw Damaris's men running parallel to her course. They dogged her steps, running below her like hounds trying to bring an eagle to bay. But they could not catch her, and by a stroke of luck she led them to an alley with no outlet. The men halted with furious shouts and turned to trace back their steps. Soon the voices faded behind her. The jail grew ever closer. Soon she was only a few streets away, but Lauren did not have Jem's knowledge of the city, and suddenly she came to a roof that led nowhere. No other building stood near enough to reach by leap or miracle, and going back would only send her to Damaris's men. She was 2 stories up. Edging to the roof, Lauren looked down to see a merchant sign hanging from the building's front, suspended by a strong beam. It reached 2 paces into the street and was fixed to the building halfway to the ground. Lauren steeled her nerves, took a deep breath, and dropped off the roof's edge. She aimed for the beam, and her aim held true, but she hit it too fast. The wood slammed into her chest like a mule's kick, and her breath left her in a whoosh. She tried to grip the wood, but flew too hard and fell the rest of the way to the street. Her right ankle twisted hard as she fell, ripping a scream from her throat. A pang of agony struck her shoulder where Auntie had cut her. She had landed in a busy thoroughfare of a street, and many stared at her in shock. Thankfully, she saw no constables. Lauren fought to her feet, wincing as she tried to put weight on her ankle. It would not bear her for long, but the jail stood close, only a couple of buildings away. Hobbling like a lame old man, Lauren limped for the gap between 2 buildings. On the other side lay the street before the jail. She was almost there. She would make it. She hobbled faster and faster until she whimpered with each step. Behind her, she heard a cry of alarm. Someone had alerted the constables, or Damaris's men. The sound of boots filled her ears again. Lauren reached the street. Almost she fell as she came out into the open again, but somehow she stayed upright. There stood the jail's front door, with 2 constables standing guards with halberds before it. And finally the stars and sky smiled upon her. for she recognized in one of them the squat and bulky frame of Corin. Both men stared at her in shock, but Corin's face looked a perfect picture of incredulity. They stood rooted as Lauren stumped towards them and finally let her ankle give way. She collapsed to the ground in the very doorway of the jail, and as she rolled to her side, she saw half a dozen of Damaris's men behind her. Lauren ignored them, looking up into Corin's worried eyes. "Justice," she wheezed. "I throw myself upon the mercy of the king's justice."
This has been a production of Legacy Books. Written and narrated by Garrett Robinson. The music in this podcast was created by Will Musser. Check out his incredible work at willmusser.com. That's WILLMUSSER.com. Today's letter is E. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.